In the shadowed vaults of the Vatican, beneath a ceiling that still seems to breathe with divine light, a reluctant sculptor lay on his back for 4 agonizing years, paint dripping into his eyes, his body twisted like a bow. He was not a painter by choice. He was Michelangelo Buonarroti, the man who declared himself a sculptor above all else. And yet the world knows him best for the Sistine Chapel ceiling, a forced labor that became one of humanity's greatest triumphs of the spirit. This is no simple tale of artistic genius. It is a philosophical odyssey through power, resistance, divine calling, and the eternal struggle between mortal flesh and immortal form. From the marble quarries of Carrara to the papal courts of Rome, from the fiery sermons of Savonarola in Florence to the quiet sonnets written in old age, Michelangelo's life reveals how constraint can forge transcendence, how a man dragged against his will into paint could liberate the soul of Western art. Born on March 6, 1475, in the tiny Tuscan village of Caprese, Michelangelo di Lodovico Buonarroti Simoni entered a world on the cusp of transformation. His father, a minor Florentine official, hoped for a respectable career in law or business, but the boy's destiny was carved in stone from the beginning. Apprenticed at 13 to the painter Domenico Ghirlandaio, he quickly rebelled against the flat, decorative style of fresco. By 15, he had secured a place in the Medici gardens of Lorenzo the Magnificent, where he studied ancient marbles under the sculptor Bertoldo di Giovanni. There, amid the Platonic Academy founded by Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola, the young artist absorbed Neoplatonism, the philosophy that saw physical beauty as a shadow of divine perfection, the human form as a ladder to God. Lorenzo treated him almost as a son, yet the Medici court was a double-edged blade, intellectual fire mixed with political intrigue. The year 1492 brought twin catastrophes. Lorenzo died, and the Dominican friar Girolamo Savonarola seized Florence with apocalyptic sermons against vanity, pagan art, and the corruption of the church. Michelangelo, torn between the sensual humanism of the Medici and Savonarola's call for moral purity, fled to Bologna and then Rome in 1496. In the Eternal City, he found his first true patron, French Cardinal Jean Billière de la Graolas. For the cardinal's future tomb in St. Peter's, the 23-year-old sculptor carved the Pietà, now in the Vatican Basilica. From a single block of Carrara marble, he liberated a miracle, the Virgin, impossibly youthful and serene, cradling the broken body of her son. The drapery flows like liquid, the anatomy is flawless, the sorrow transcendent. Michelangelo was so proud that he signed it boldly across the sash on Mary's breast, the only work he ever signed. Vasari records that Romans refused to believe a young Florentine could achieve such perfection. The sculpture announced a new era, where the artist was no longer mere craftsman, but divine creator. Back in Florence in 1501, the city fathers handed him a rejected marble block, badly weathered, abandoned for decades by lesser sculptors. From this flawed giant, he carved David, 17 feet tall, unveiled in 1504 before the Palazzo Vecchio. Not the victorious giant slayer of tradition, but a tense youth in the moment before battle, veins bulging, gaze fierce, sling slung casually over his shoulder. The statue embodied Florence's republican defiance against tyrants, yet its anatomy reveals Michelangelo's obsession, the body as battlefield of soul and matter. He had dissected corpses in secret, risking excommunication, to master every muscle, tendon, and vein. David was not imitation of nature, it was liberation of the ideal form imprisoned within the stone, a core Neoplatonic conviction that the sculptor's task was to free the statue already latent in the marble. That same year, Pope Julius II, warrior pontiff, Il Papa Terribile, summoned Michelangelo to Rome. Julius dreamed of a colossal tomb for himself, 40 life-size statues rising in a pyramidal monument to outshine ancient emperors. Michelangelo quarried marble in Carrara, spent 3 years on the project, only to see Julius abruptly halt funding for a cheaper scheme, painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. The artist protested furiously. "I am a sculptor, not a painter," he raged in letters. He even fled Rome in 1506, hiding in Florence, until Julius threatened excommunication. Reluctantly, he returned in 1508. The Pope had won. Michelangelo would paint. What followed was 4 years of solitary torment. No large team of assistants. Michelangelo worked almost alone, lying on his back on rickety scaffolding, neck craned, paint and plaster raining down. He described the ordeal in a sonnet. "My beard points to heaven, my neck is twisted like a bow, my loins have entered my belly, my head hangs over my shoulders." The ceiling, originally planned as simple apostles, exploded under his vision into 9 central scenes from Genesis: creation of the world, Adam and Eve, the flood, surrounded by prophets, sibyls, ignudi, and ancestral figures. The most iconic, the creation of Adam, captures the instant divine spark leaps from God's finger to man. Not mere illustration, but Neoplatonic theology in paint. God is dynamic energy. Adam, beautiful yet passive, awaits the infusion of soul. Scholars still debate the hidden anatomy in God's cloak, perhaps a brain, symbol of intellect as divine gift. The work was unveiled on All Saints' Day 1512. Crowds gasped. Pope Julius, though ill, climbed the scaffolding himself. Yet Michelangelo considered it a distraction from his true vocation, sculpture. He returned obsessively to Julius's tomb, carving the monumental Moses around 1513–1515, now in San Pietro in Vincoli. The prophet sits with horns, from a Vulgate mistranslation of rays of light, tablets in hand, muscles coiled with restrained fury. It was meant for the tomb's center. Instead, it became a fragment of a dream. The full tomb, reduced and relocated, haunted Michelangelo for decades. He called it the tragedy of my life. Rivalries sharpened the drama. Leonardo da Vinci, older and courtly, dismissed sculpture as dusty labor. Michelangelo mocked Leonardo's unfinished projects. In 1504, they were pitted against each other in Florence's Palazzo Vecchio, each painting battle cartoons, lost masterpieces that influenced an entire generation. Raphael, the charming Urbino prodigy favored by popes, studied Michelangelo's ceiling in secret and incorporated its grandeur into the School of Athens. Michelangelo sneered at Raphael as a prince of painters, while he himself remained the solitary stonecutter. Yet rivalry fueled excellence. Each pushed the other toward new heights. Michelangelo's personal life mirrored his art's tension. He lived austerely, despite growing wealth, eating little, sleeping in clothes and boots, working by candlelight fixed to a paper hat. Letters to his family reveal a melancholic, irritable man, forever complaining of money and health ruined by stone dust and fresco fumes. His poetry, over 300 sonnets and madrigals, speaks in Neoplatonic code. Many address the young Roman noble Tommaso de' Cavalieri, to whom he sent passionate drawings and verses of ideal love. "I am captive to your beauty. The soul climbs through the eyes to heaven." Later, the widow Vittoria Colonna became his spiritual muse. Their friendship produced sonnets of profound faith and consolation. Michelangelo never married. His deepest affections were platonic, yet intense, channeled into art as the true beloved. Politics pulled him back to Florence. In 1527, the Medici were expelled. Michelangelo, Republican at heart despite Medici patronage, supervised fortifications during the siege. When the family returned as dukes, he designed the Medici chapels and Laurentian library, architecture that twists and strains like his figures, defying classical calm. In 1534, he fled Florence permanently for Rome, fearing Duke Alessandro's wrath. There, Pope Paul III commissioned the Sistine altar wall, the Last Judgment, unveiled in 1541 after 6 years. Over 300 figures swirl in apocalyptic vortex around a beardless, muscular Christ. Saints and sinners, the damned dragged to hell by demons, the saved ascending. Nudity shocked contemporaries. Later, the Council of Trent ordered drapery at it. Michelangelo included self-portraits, his face on the flayed skin of St. Bartholomew, a quiet admission of mortal frailty. The work reflects his deepening faith amid Reformation storms, humanity judged not by beauty alone, but by grace. In his final decades, Michelangelo turned architect. Appointed chief of St. Peter's Basilica in 1547, he redesigned the dome, still the largest unsupported in the world, rising like a prayer above Rome. He carved late Pietas in secret, the Florentine Pietà with Nicodemus, possibly a self-portrait, smashed in frustration and later reassembled. The Rondinini Pietà, unfinished at his death, reduced almost to abstraction, figures merging as if returning to the primal stone. These works abandon heroic perfection for raw spiritual anguish, the sculptor finally freeing not ideal form, but suffering soul. He died on February 18, 1564, at 88, still working. His body was smuggled to Florence and buried in Santa Croce amid national mourning. Giorgio Vasari and Ascanio Condivi, his contemporary biographers, called him divine. Yet the man himself remained humble before the marble and the divine. What, then, is the philosophical heart of Michelangelo's story? He was forced to paint, yet that constraint unlocked his greatest revelation. Art is never mere technique, but the battleground where human limitation meets divine infinity. The Sistine ceiling, born of papal coercion, became a visual theology, Neoplatonic ascent from chaos to creation, from flesh to spirit. His sculptures teach that the artist does not impose form, he liberates what God has hidden within matter. His life warns that power, whether papal, political, or personal, can bend the artist. But true genius bends back, transforming chains into wings. In an age of Medici intrigue, Savonarola's bonfires, and Reformation fire, Michelangelo chose neither pure pagan beauty nor ascetic denial. He forged a third path, the tormented, exalted human form as mirror of the divine.
Today, as tourists crane their necks beneath the Sistine or stand speechless before David, they feel what Michelangelo felt, the ache of creation, the cost of vision. The sculptor forced to paint did not surrender his soul, he enlarged it, until stone, paint, and poetry all spoke the same eternal language, that in the struggle against limitation, the human spirit touches God.
As the camera fades on the dim light of his final unfinished Pietà, the wind whispering through the quarries of Carrara, remember his own words carved in a sonnet. The best of artists hath no thought to show, which the rough stone in its superfluous spell doth not include. To break the marble spell is all the hand can do. In breaking marble, ceiling, and his own body, Michelangelo broke open the heavens for all who followed. The masterpiece was never the painting alone. It was the man who refused to be defined by the forces that tried to shape him, and in the end shaped the world instead. In the sun-drenched squares of early 16th century Florence, two giants of the Renaissance stood on opposite sides of the same wall, their brushes and chalks poised like weapons in an artistic duel that would echo through centuries. One was Leonardo da Vinci, the elder master, 51 years old, courtly, enigmatic, a polymath whose mind wandered from anatomy to flying machines, from sfumato veils of light to the perfect horse that he could never quite cast in bronze. The other was Michelangelo Buonarroti, barely 29, intense, devout, unwashed, a sculptor who despised painting as inferior labor, yet wielded it with ferocious power. Their rivalry was no polite competition of styles. It was personal, philosophical, and profoundly productive, a collision of worldviews that pushed both men to heights they might never have reached alone. This is the story of how the city of Florence, in a moment of Republican pride, forced its two greatest artists into direct confrontation, and how that forced proximity revealed the deepest tensions of the High Renaissance: motion versus monumentality, intellect versus passion, paint versus stone. The stage was set in the Salone dei Cinquecento, the vast council hall of the Palazzo Vecchio, heart of the Florentine Republic. Piero Soderini, the gonfaloniere, and his secretary, Niccolò Machiavelli, sought to decorate the walls with grand murals celebrating Florentine military victories. In October 1503, Leonardo da Vinci received the commission for the Battle of Anghiari, commemorating the 1440 Florentine triumph over Milanese forces. The subject suited Leonardo perfectly, a chaotic cavalry clash centered on the furious struggle for a battle standard. He prepared an enormous cartoon in the Sala del Papa at Santa Maria Novella, using vast sheets of paper glued with flour paste. His design exploded with dynamic energy, horses rearing, biting, riders twisting in mortal combat. Copies that survive, such as the one preserving the central Fight for the Standard, show Leonardo's genius for capturing raw fury and anatomical precision in motion. He even experimented with an innovative oil-on-wall technique, hoping to achieve the soft transitions of his famous sfumato.
Then, in the summer of 1504, the Signoria made a fateful decision. Michelangelo Buonarroti, fresh from unveiling his colossal David outside the same palazzo in May 1504, a statue that had become the very symbol of Republican defiance, received the opposite wall. His subject, the Battle of Cassina, a 1364 victory over Pisa. The commission was explicitly framed as competition. Giorgio Vasari, writing decades later in The Lives of the Artists, states plainly that Michelangelo was hired in competition with Leonardo. The two cartoons would hang side by side, studied by the entire artistic community of Florence. Young artists flocked to copy them. Benvenuto Cellini later called the paired works the School of the World.
The contrast could not have been more deliberate or more explosive. Leonardo's Anghiari focused on the frenzied climax of battle: swirling horses, clashing swords, the chaos of war rendered with scientific observation and psychological depth. Michelangelo chose a quieter, more psychological moment: the Florentine soldiers bathing naked in the Arno River, suddenly surprised by the Pisan attack. In his surviving copies, notably Aristotele da Sangallo's, we see muscular bodies in every conceivable pose, twisting, climbing from the water, scrambling for armor, muscles rippling with tension. Where Leonardo celebrated fluid motion and the interplay of light and atmosphere, Michelangelo exalted the heroic male nude as the ultimate expression of human potential, stone-like even in drawing, each figure a sculpted soul struggling against flesh. The rivalry spilled into the streets. A well-documented anecdote recorded in an anonymous 1540s manuscript and repeated by Vasari captures the bitterness. Leonardo was walking near the Palazzo Spini-Ferroni with friends when a group debating a passage from Dante called him over for an explanation. Spotting Michelangelo passing by, Leonardo remarked, "Michelangelo will explain it for you." Michelangelo, suspecting a trap, snapped back, "Explain it yourself, you who designed a horse to be cast in bronze but could never finish it and had to abandon the project in shame." As he turned to leave, he added a final sting, "And those Milanese castrated roosters actually believed in you." Leonardo reportedly blushed in silence. The wound was deep. Leonardo's colossal clay model for the Sforza horse in Milan had been destroyed by French archers without ever being cast. Michelangelo, the sculptor, never let him forget it. Their fundamental philosophies clashed even more sharply. Leonardo viewed painting as the supreme art. The paragone, comparison, he championed in his notebooks, argued that it encompassed all others through intellect, observation, and the subtle play of light. Sculpture, he suggested, was dusty, laborious, and limited. Michelangelo, in a famous letter years later to Benedetto Varchi, retorted acidly, "If the man who wrote that painting was nobler than sculpture had known as much about the other arts, my serving-maid could have written better." For Michelangelo, sculpture was the divine act of liberating form already imprisoned in marble. Painting was secondary, a necessary evil. Yet in the Palazzo Vecchio, both were forced to prove themselves on the same battlefield, using the cartoon as their weapon.
Neither mural was ever completed as a fresco. Leonardo began painting the central scene, but experimented with a new encaustic-like technique that failed disastrously. The colors ran, and the plaster would not hold. He abandoned the project around 1506 and left for Milan. Michelangelo produced only the full-scale cartoon before Pope Julius II summoned him to Rome in 1505 for the papal tomb. The cartoons themselves became legendary. Artists studied them obsessively until they were damaged or destroyed. Michelangelo's reportedly torn apart in 1512 by the jealous sculptor Baccio Bandinelli during political turmoil, though some accounts suggest it simply wore out from overuse. Leonardo's central section survived long enough for Rubens and others to copy its dynamic fury.
The rivalry did not end in Florence. It shadowed their entire careers. Raphael, the younger prodigy, studied both masters intensely, absorbing Leonardo's grace and Michelangelo's power to forge his own harmonious style in the School of Athens. Michelangelo mocked Raphael as overly dependent on others' inventions. Leonardo, in his notebooks, criticized artists who made figures look like bags of walnuts by overemphasizing muscles, an unmistakable jab at Michelangelo's heroic anatomies. Yet each pushed the other forward. Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling, begun shortly after, exploded with the same monumental energy he had rehearsed in the Cassina cartoon. Leonardo's later works continued his quest for motion and psychological depth. Their competition elevated the entire generation that followed.
Philosophically, the duel embodied the central tension of the High Renaissance. Leonardo represented the cool, empirical, universal intellect, man as observer and inventor, art as science. Michelangelo embodied passionate, Neoplatonic struggle, man as heroic sufferer, art as liberation of the divine spark trapped in matter. One sought harmony through sfumato and infinite subtlety, the other through terribilità, awe-inspiring power that could terrify and exalt. In the end, neither won the Palazzo Vecchio contest. Both lost the physical murals, yet both triumphed by forcing the Renaissance to confront its own contradictions. Philosophically, the duel embodied the central tension of the High Renaissance. Leonardo represented the cool, empirical, universal intellect, man as observer and inventor, art as science. Michelangelo embodied passionate, Neoplatonic struggle, man as heroic sufferer, art as liberation of the divine spark trapped in matter. One sought harmony through sfumato and infinite subtlety, the other through terribilità, awe-inspiring power that could terrify and exalt. In the end, neither won the Palazzo Vecchio contest. Both lost the physical murals, yet both triumphed by forcing the Renaissance to confront its own contradictions.
While Michelangelo and Leonardo clashed openly in the halls of Florence like two storms colliding, a younger artist arrived quietly in 1504, notebook in hand, eyes wide with hunger. Raffaello Sanzio, Raphael, was only 21, charming, graceful, and already remarkably skilled. Born in Urbino in 1483, the son of a court painter, he had absorbed the gentle sweetness of Perugino's style. Yet something deeper called him to Florence, the city where the two undisputed giants of the age, Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo Buonarroti were locked in their famous contest for the Palazzo Vecchio battle cartoons. Raphael did not come to fight them, he came to study them. And in doing so, he created a third path that would challenge both, blending Leonardo's intellectual grace with Michelangelo's monumental power into a harmonious perfection that many contemporaries found even more pleasing. Raphael's relationship with Leonardo was never the bitter, personal antagonism that defined Leonardo's exchanges with Michelangelo. Instead, it was a profound, almost devotional influence mixed with the quiet ambition of a brilliant student who refuses to remain merely a follower. Giorgio Vasari, in his Lives of the Artists, describes the moment with characteristic warmth. After seeing Leonardo's works, Raphael was left marveling and amazed. He abandoned Perugino's manner little by little, striving to the best of his power and knowledge to imitate that of Leonardo. Vasari notes that while Raphael never fully surpassed Leonardo in the sublime groundwork of conceptions and grandeur of art, he came very near, especially in grace of coloring and a natural facility that made his figures seem effortlessly alive. In Florence, between 1504 and 1508, Raphael devoured Leonardo's innovations. He copied the Mona Lisa's revolutionary three-quarter pose and mysterious sfumato, the soft, smoky blending of tones that dissolved hard outlines into atmospheric depth. Several of Raphael's Florentine Madonnas show this debt clearly. The Madonna of the Goldfinch, the Bridgewater Madonna, and the Esterhazy Madonna adopt Leonardo's pyramidal compositions and the tender psychological intimacy between mother and child. He studied Leonardo's lost Leda and the Swan, borrowing dynamic twists and contrapposto for his own figures. Even small details, such as the modest hand resting on the opposite arm, echo the Mona Lisa. Raphael learned from Leonardo how light and shadow could convey emotion and inner life, transforming flat Peruginesque sweetness into breathing, sentient beauty. Yet Raphael was no mere imitator. Where Leonardo's intellect often led him to leave works unfinished in pursuit of perfection, experimenting endlessly with techniques that sometimes failed, as in the disastrous Battle of Anghiari, Raphael possessed an almost supernatural ability to synthesize and complete. He absorbed Leonardo's lessons on anatomy, perspective, and human expression, then tempered them with his own innate sense of harmony and clarity. Leonardo sought the universal through scientific observation and philosophical depth. Raphael sought ideal beauty through graceful balance. The younger artist turned Leonardo's subtle psychological insight into compositions of serene order that felt immediately accessible and divine. The influence deepened when Raphael moved to Rome around 1508, summoned by Pope Julius II, thanks in part to his relative, the architect Bramante. There, in the Vatican Stanze della Segnatura, he painted his masterpiece, the School of Athens, 1509–11. At the center stands Plato, pointing upward to the realm of ideal forms, his face unmistakably modeled on Leonardo da Vinci, with the same flowing beard, wise expression, and thoughtful gaze familiar from self-portraits and contemporary descriptions. It is a profound homage. Raphael places the older master as the embodiment of philosophical wisdom itself. Aristotle stands beside him, grounding the scene in empirical reality, creating the perfect Renaissance balance between Plato's idealism and Aristotelian observation, mirroring how Raphael balanced Leonardo's intellectual subtlety with more concrete grandeur. Leonardo had already left Italy for France by 1516. He died there in 1519. So the two never competed directly for the same commissions in Rome. Yet Raphael's rising star inevitably cast a long shadow. While Leonardo's later years were marked by wandering patronage and unfinished projects, Raphael became the favorite artist of the papal court, executing the Stanze frescoes with astonishing speed and consistency. His charm and diplomatic skill contrasted sharply with Leonardo's enigmatic reserve and Michelangelo's brooding intensity. Raphael won admirers not only through talent, but through his ability to please patrons without alienating rivals, though even he could not escape the competitive undercurrents of the Roman art world.
The rivalry with Leonardo remained largely one of influence rather than open conflict, but it carried philosophical weight. Leonardo championed painting as the highest art in his paragone, superior because it could encompass all others through intellect, light, and illusion. Raphael, by mastering and refining Leonardo's techniques while adding architectural clarity and emotional warmth, implicitly proved that painting could achieve harmonious perfection without the older master's restless experimentation. Some contemporaries even suggested Raphael surpassed Leonardo in grace and facility, a judgment that would have stung the elder genius had he heard it in full. Raphael's engagement with Leonardo's legacy was respectful, almost filial, yet it contained the quiet ambition of a successor. He did not mock Leonardo, as Michelangelo sometimes did. Instead, he internalized the lessons and made them his own. In portraits like La Fornarina or the portrait of Baldassare Castiglione, Raphael achieved a psychological depth and softness that rivaled the Mona Lisa, while maintaining greater compositional stability. His Madonnas combined Leonardo's tender humanity with a classical serenity that felt eternal. In the broader triangle of genius, Leonardo the visionary intellect, Michelangelo the tormented sculptor of the soul, Raphael the harmonious synthesizer, Raphael often emerged as the most complete painter in the eyes of many patrons and later critics. Vasari, though deeply biased toward Michelangelo, still acknowledged that Raphael's works were judged by some to be more strictly in accordance with the rules of art, excelling in graceful coloring, beautiful invention, and admirable expression. This subtle elevation of Raphael over aspects of both older masters added another layer to the rivalries of the age. Raphael died young on his 37th birthday in 1520, leaving the Vatican projects unfinished. Leonardo had passed the year before. Michelangelo, who outlived them both by decades, later claimed with characteristic gruffness that everything Raphael knew he learned from me, a dismissive remark that ignored the deep Leonardo influence visible throughout Raphael's career. Yet the truth is more generous. Raphael learned from both titans, forging something new that felt like the perfect synthesis of their strengths. He took Leonardo's sfumato and intellectual subtlety, Michelangelo's monumental figures and dynamic energy, and wove them into compositions of ideal beauty and clarity that defined the high Renaissance ideal. Philosophically, Raphael's rivalry with Leonardo represents the fruitful tension between innovation and perfection. Leonardo pushed boundaries through endless inquiry, often at the cost of completion. Raphael absorbed those innovations and delivered finished masterpieces that spoke immediately to the heart and eye. Where Leonardo invited viewers into mystery, Raphael offered harmonious resolution. Their artistic dialogue, master and gifted disciple, elevated the entire generation that followed, influencing everyone from the Mannerists to the classical revivalists centuries later. Today, when we stand before the School of Athens and recognize Leonardo's face as Plato, or study Raphael's Florentine Madonnas beside the Mona Lisa, we witness not mere copying, but creative transformation. The younger artist honored the elder by surpassing him in accessibility and grace, proving that true greatness in art often lies in synthesis rather than solitary invention. In the end, Raphael did not defeat Leonardo in open combat as Michelangelo tried to do. He did something perhaps more lasting. He internalized the master's fire, refined it with his own gentle light, and passed a perfected flame to the future. The rivalry was quiet, respectful, and profoundly generative. Another reminder that in the Renaissance, as in all ages of genius, competition and admiration were two sides of the same coin that forged immortal beauty.